the Sustaining Creativity podcast. I'm your host, Mari Riesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Noah Healy, a market designer, game theorist, and recreational mathematician. Please enjoy Noah Healy. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity podcast. Today, I'm here with Noah Healy, a market designer, game theorist, and recreational mathematician. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to chat about the connections of creativity and math and all the other things you do. But before we get there, if you wouldn't mind just taking a couple of minutes and letting our listeners know a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, as you said, my name's Noah Healy. I'm a recreational mathematician with an interest in computational mathematics. That is algorithms and how computers and processes work, mostly. So that's what I enjoy thinking about. A little over half a decade ago, I was playing around with a problem in information consensus and discovered a way to do price discovery. So discovering a technique for discovery. You get a lot of recursion in computational mathematics, and that's what I like the most about it. And when I analyzed it compared to the systems that are in use today, it had a large theoretical advantage. And so I have started working on spreading news about it and trying to get it adopted so that we can upgrade how economics functions.
Well, wouldn't that be great?
Yes, it would.
I love it. I mean, hearing you talk about it just makes me think of how people take a product or something that was created before and essentially use that foundation to make something new or improve the process. Or what does it mean to you to be creative?
I think it means coming up with something that has truly never been seen before. I think there's a distinction between craft and creativity. Craft, I think, is very valuable and is a key part of creativity. So, for example, as a hobby, I bake, and also I eat baked goods, probably more than I should. But I've done a little bit of experimenting, and I've created a couple of recipes. That's sort of nothing compared to, like people who have cooking shows and like joy of cooking. Like there are people that create hundreds or thousands of recipes, but
Sure.
I've taken a few things and, adapted them a little bit and then run some experiments to get something that sort of works, and then created a couple of recipes. But most of what's made me better at baking was just the exercise of doing it. And so I'm a lot better at making breads and desserts today than I was 25 years ago.
Sure. Nice. Like flexing that muscle or the repetition or the practice that goes into anything. We assume you will get better over time.
So the thing is, if you're crafting, you are making something new.
Mm-hmm.
But sort of mere novelty, you know, almost every time somebody shuffles a deck of cards, they get a card ordering that has never been seen before and will never be seen again,
Mm-hmm.
just because of how many card orderings there are. Uh, that doesn't really count as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, okay.
Um, and even beyond mere novelty, use. My father was a builder. It's a very valuable thing, and
Mm-hmm.
in some sense, uh, a new house is a new thing, and it's something that it hasn't been there before.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, particularly in mathematics, you really have to go out and trod ground that's never even been imagined for it to
Mm-hmm.
count. Uh, and
Yeah.
so I have kind of a high bar for that.
Great. I love it. I mean, it's not every day that I get to talk to someone who has such a high bar for creativity when it comes to mathematics. And I just think that's wonderful. I think there there's something really special in that kind of world of math where you are looking for that something that's never been found before. Whereas in other areas of creativity, we might be playing off of something that was done before, but by us doing it, it is a new experience and expression because it's through our voice. And it sounds like it's a different process and experience in the world of mathematics.
I think it really is. I've I've heard this from a few people who are a lot smarter than I am, and I've kind of experienced myself. There's sort of this combination of what it feels like to daydream and what it feels like uh, for like flow state concentration
Yeah.
at the same time.
Okay.
Um, and it's actually quite intoxicating, if you get there, which is
Yeah.
which is why trying to do that is what I do for fun. Um, but
Mm-hmm.
but even following along with some of these things, you can't you can't make new breakthroughs, but you can sort of follow along and kind of see and understand breakthroughs for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the the sort of, I guess, kind of the downside, because of my sort of eclectic spread of view,
Mm-hmm.
is that sometimes I think things up that are already well known. And so
Mm-hmm.
you think up something and it's really cool, and then you go look it up, and it was really cool. um, it was state of the art 6 centuries ago or something.
But hey, you discovered it in your own time with your own experience. I think that can be
Yes.
meaningful.
Yeah, it definitely helps sustain. And there are discoveries don't have to be world-shaking breakthroughs,
Mm-hmm.
to really be new and interesting things.
What you said before about working on an equation and getting into that daydreaming flow state, I guess I've never really thought of that happening for mathematicians or people who are researching something in that capacity, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's sort of an exciting time for mathematics, because in the 20th century, essentially mathematics broke itself
Oh,
in a very fundamental way.
okay.
Uh, the the enabling ideas that allow computers to exist,
Mm-hmm.
were actually based on this problem, that is very ancient, about integer mathematics, which is, at a very simple level, the kind of math we teach to school kids.
Okay.
So if you have whole numbers and you're adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing them together, and the
Hmm.
answer is also always a whole number, do things have solutions? So like 5 divided by 2 has no solutions in whole numbers.
Hmm.
Um, and so the 19th century had sort of really nailed down calculus, and mathematicians were really feeling their oats. And there's a guy named David Hilbert who set out this program for 20th century mathematics. And the 10th problem was, uh, in their words, mechanizing the solution to these problems. So the idea was that we would know so much about the kind of math we teach to school kids that we would actually be able to build a machine that you
Oh,
could stick one into and it would just solve the problem for you.
oh, okay.
And Alan Turing, who is becoming a lot more famous these days,
Hmm.
um, didn't quite invent the computer, but invented a computational system,
Mm-hmm.
demonstrated what it could do, demonstrated what it couldn't do, and demonstrated that one of the things it couldn't do was solve these problems.
Oh no, what
So,
they wanted it to do, it couldn't
right.
do.
So not only was it impossible to build a machine that could solve these problems, it's actually impossible to imagine anything that could solve these problems in general, because it turns out that in general they don't have solutions. There
Oh,
are ones of these problems that, um, while they will have a solution, you won't be able to find them, or finding the solution would cause a self contradiction.
oh
Um,
my gosh.
and so that was a real hammer blow. There was another
No kidding.
uh, thing that was being worked on. Have you ever heard of Bertrand Russell? He
I
was
have
a very
not.
famous philosopher and pacifist of the early 20th century,
Okay.
and he was working with a guy named Alfred Whitehead, and the two of them wrote this massive tome that they called Principia Mathematica, which was the same title as Newton's
Oh,
opus on physics, um, in which he attempts to completely define all of mathematics in terms of sets and logic. Rather famously in this book, they spend something like 280 pages proving that 1 plus 1 equals 2. Um,
wow. That's like intense amount of
yes,
pages to do that.
yes. Well, it turns out that that was essentially wasted effort,
Oh
uh,
no.
because uh, what Turing and another mathematical theorist, Kurt Gödel, worked out was that once a system of logic or computation or reason or structure gets complicated enough,
Hmm.
it either contains the ability to make statements which cannot be resolved by the system in any way, uh, or it contains an internal contradiction. So every statement can be resolved in every way. So
Oh my goodness.
the system isn't really doing anything.
Yeah.
Um,
It just sounds like, I mean, so many challenges like show up and
well, so yes, so math actually has gone to the trouble of redefining its basic assumptions for even arithmetic, um, in order to try to get away from these problems, and creating models of postulates and axioms that are simple enough, i.e., don't come up to the computational sort of threshold,
yeah.
so that proofs can be made that can actually be relied upon. Um, and it turns out that the computational threshold is really, really low.
Oh,
Uh,
who
and
knew?
many systems turn out to be computationally capable. Um,
Okay.
one sort of interesting coincidence is that Turing's model of a general computation machine, was something called a state machine. That is a thing that's capable of being in one of a set number of conditions, and
Hmm.
given its condition, it can react to the outside world by changing its condition in some way.
Hmm.
So taking one of those devices and adding to it a infinite strip of paper that it could read and write off of and move along.
Yeah.
And that turns out to be Turing complete. Um, this is interesting for a few reasons. One of them is that our DNA is probably the closest mechanical analog to one of those systems that exists in the world. We've never commercialized a Turing machine, but our
Yeah.
DNA is a very long strip of 300 billion base pairs that the cell mechanisms can basically move along and update themselves based on them. Um, but another one is that the state machine, that thing that can sort of react to different
Hmm.
systems, a state machine is sufficient to add numbers together,
Oh,
but it can't multiply numbers together.
okay. Has some limitations.
But a Turing machine, so a state machine plus that paper strip,
Yeah.
can do anything that you can imagine by definition.
Oh my goodness. The like world of creativity when it comes to that, just, I mean, kind of sounds a little overwhelming when it can do anything based on your definition of imagine, anything you can imagine. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, that's the fundamentally interesting thing about computers.
Mhm.
Obviously, we have a set of apps, sort of appliances that we use them for.
Yeah.
But at core, what makes that work is that the CPU is a general purpose computing system. And
Hmm.
so what happens in the CPU is it can behave like any machine you can describe to it.
Okay.
So you 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 or rather say Google describes a search engine to their
Uh-huh.
machines, and then they behave like a search engine, even though
Crazy.
the silicon, although there's a lot more of it, is fundamentally the same sorts of circuitry that you have in your own system. Um,
So fascinating. Well, I'm super curious. I mean, this conversation is fascinating about how things develop and change, and the creativity is rather impressive with how it shows up. I'm really curious how you yourself face creative challenges when you come up against them.
um, a little bit of panic first.
Okay.
Math problems tend to get very hard before they get interesting. And
Okay.
so I'm never quite sure I actually can solve the problem that is
Uh-huh.
facing me. Um, uh, and and so sort of my first pass, I'm looking for an intuitive hook.
Hmm.
Uh, so, for example, the market system that I was thinking about,
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about getting consensus uh, on a network of agents.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I was then thinking about sort of betting pools and how like different structures of parimutual pools create a consensus odds system for some
Mm-hmm.
outcome. Uh, and I didn't quite like the structure of those things. And so I turned it into this sort of very simple model of uh, what if different entities betting on an outcome um, basically paid to move their
Mm.
beliefs towards where they thought the answer would go, and
Mhm.
then the system would pay them back, basically, if it turned out that they were right, or
Mm.
keep the money if they turned out they were wrong and give it to whoever had to correct them.
Mhm.
Um, and so then, and this is a very common step in mathematics, once you have a system that looks like it works to do something, I thought to myself, how would you generalize this idea? Like
Mm.
what is it about this that you could make much more general?
Mhm.
Um, and that got me into first game theory,
Mm.
which provides a structure. So game theory uh, is the mathematics of the interaction of choice making agents. It's an incredibly general field.
Okay, yeah.
uh, it has fairly limited utility, actually, for the kinds of strategic games that people are actually interested in. Because even, say, tic tac toe,
Mhm.
using sort of traditional game theory would require an immensely complicated uh, uh, structure to encapsulate what's going on, because game theory essentially posits the existence of what it calls pure strategies.
Mm.
Um, so a pure strategy for tic-tac-toe would be a rule for where you're going to move first. So a statement about where you're going to move first, and
Mhm.
then given every response you might see from your opponent, how would you respond to that response? And
Yeah.
then for every response that you might see your opponent to that second thing, for an entire game across all possible
Mhm.
opponent responses. Um, and so let's see, that's 24 times 16, it's 384.
I
So
like the
assuming that
fast
you go
math.
first, uh, that would be 384 entries
Mhm.
for one pure strategy, and there'd be 384 separate pure strategies that you would
Oh
have to.
my goodness.
But if you were to sort of write up this matrix
Mhm.
of all of the pure strategies for each player, then you could very easily analyze the resulting game. Um,
Okay.
but what we actually use it for is strategic situations which are much simpler than that. And there are some fairly famous two-player, two-choice games
Hmm.
where they're the pure strategies are basically just, you know, door number one or door number two.
Got it. I never
Uh,
realized how complicated tic-tac-toe actually is.
yeah, well, uh, a child's game that is amenable to game theory
Mhm.
would be rock paper scissors,
Oh, okay.
because once again there's just a pure strategy. It's a
Mhm.
three choice two-player game, so the game matrix is 3 by 3, so there's 9 entries in the game
Mhm.
matrix. And what an analysis of that will show you is that the optimum strategy is to randomly choose uh, at odds 1/3 each of the three
Mhm.
choices.
I see. When you think about kind of your everyday life, what are some of the everyday issues that you've had to use creativity to solve?
Um, well, getting into uh, sort of craft of things, there's
Mhm.
always problems to solve. Uh,
Mhm.
I live in a fairly old house. My house was built in 1940. So I had a hot water line um, decide to spring a leak, and and it's like a cast iron. So I either could replace all of my plumbing or figure out how to solve this one leak issue.
Yeah.
Um, and so I wound up um, cutting through the pipe and having to stick in a pipe patch, And then uh, because the pipes aren't braced in any way, I had to jury rig and build a couple of different stabilizers to keep the pipes going against the pressure. Um, uh, like I said, I've invented a couple of recipes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I adapted a flourless brownie recipe into a uh, cupcake-sized souffle
Oh,
recipe.
wow.
That's really good about 60% of the time. It doesn't always it doesn't soufflés are delicate. They don't always gel.
Yes, they
These are
are.
a lot simpler than regular soufflés because they're so small,
Mm-hmm.
but there's
Okay.
that. And then from time to time in my professional life, I mostly design uh, back office systems for tech companies or
Mm-hmm.
do some other kind of data analytics or information work for them.
I feel like I got the curtain pulled back a little bit on the world of mathematics and computation for the other
Yeah,
things. Yeah.
it's a very interesting perspective once you realize that information is this very general and common thing that you encounter in the world all
Yeah.
of the time, and that managing and transforming information is a process that not just computers, but your brain, your
Mm-hmm.
visual cortex,
Yeah.
your imagination engages in, um, and and that one of the big breakthroughs in science was changing temperature to a number.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's what allowed the discovery of the conservation of energy,
Hmm.
um, because in say a chemical process, you can sort of see energy disappear out of the
Mm-hmm.
system if you can't quantify heat
Hmm.
properly. But once you can quantify temperature and understand the relationship between heat and temperature,
Mm-hmm.
then you can equate mechanical work to other things. And I think it was Lavoisier um, created a sealed glass bulb that had a little paddle wheel inside of
Mm-hmm.
it,
Yeah.
uh, with a water bath and a thermometer.
Mm-hmm.
And the paddle wheel was attached to a weighted string that
Mm-hmm.
he could let go and perform, gravitational potential. We knew exactly how much work a falling weight would achieve. Um, and he had this other completely closed system, so he could see precisely how much heat was transferred into the system mechanically. And once he could work out that the amount of heat that was transferred was not only exactly the same for any given thing, but also
Mm-hmm.
scaled perfectly with the amount of energy that you were putting in, then
Nice.
he could demonstrate.
And so many other things came from that, it sounds like.
That's a core of getting efficient mechanical heat engines, which is where railroads and cars and
So many things
and functioning
came from there.
transportation,
I
yes,
love
come
it.
from.
This has been such a fascinating conversation about creativity. I just have one last question. What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
Well, like I said, it's sort of this intoxicating mix of flow state and imagination. Um,
Mm.
the There's just this kind of sense that you're on the right trail, and that there's this connection between reality and your thoughts.
Hmm.
And then in math, you can prove it to yourself.
Yeah.
In other fields, a composer or a sculptor can
Mhm.
create, you know,
Yeah.
compositions probably a little bit closer because you're creating strokes on the page and then it have to
Mhm.
be performed. But in other things you would create a physical object. Um, but creating an idea that is sound, um, that can actually teach you new things as you're thinking about it because
Mhm.
it's sound, is really amazing. Um,
Yeah, I bet. I can only imagine. Well, if people want to learn more about the work that you do and your other ideas, where would they go about doing that?
so I have a website at Cord Disc. That's COORD ISC. So it's coordinated discovery,
Mhm.
which is my different approach to price discovery. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm Noah Healy on LinkedIn, or my email is noahphealy@yahoo.com. Um,
Perfect. I will put all of that in the show notes so people can find you easily. And thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. It's been awesome.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, this has been quite enjoyable. Little trip to places I have not been for a while.
I love when that happens. That's wonderful. Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.